but I'm back here with Sam Worthington-Leese. Hi, Sam. How are you doing?
Hi. Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
You're freshing from where at the moment?
Oh God. Well, just Doncaster today, but I'm in a hotel in Manchester and off to Barcelona at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Oh, lovely. Oh, well, we'll try not to keep you up too late then. So for people who don't know, Sam is a TUI pilot, first
Yeah.
officer.
Yep.
So flying people, he's the person that takes happy people to happy places. So you spent time in the RAF, but you got a rather wonderful hobby.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few.
You've
So
got a few, right? So yeah. Every schoolboy's dream is number one. So I
okay.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So this little beastie. So you do a little bit of Spitfire flying.
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did you get into that?
Well, sort of long story, but joined the Air Force with a view to one day wanting to fly on the BBMF. As I thought at the time that was the only way to be able to do that sort of thing. And then that kind of got cut short when I got made redundant. I was only on EFTs and I'd only done 2 hours and 5 minutes of the finest flying training that the Queen had to offer. And so I left, went to Cab Air to do a integrated frozen ATPL, as I thought I'd carry on trying to become a commercial pilot. They went bust about 8 months later. And so I was kind of back to square one. And then I ended up doing the flying training via what's called the modular route. So I did a PPL, then built hours, bolted on all the ratings, and ended up as a sort of commercial pilot. But while I was doing that flying training in the very early days, I met a couple of really influential people. One of them is retired Air Marshal Cliff Spink, who a lot of people know of, very active in the warbird world. And I made an effort to keep in touch with him over the years as I progressed through my flying training. And I did a lot of tailwheel flying. I used my hour building to fly tailwheel aeroplanes and do aerobatics, whereas a lot of people use their hour building to do sort of navigation exercises ready for the CPL, the commercial pilot's license. I spent the whole time upside down or in a tail dragger. And I just kind of knew that I wanted to fly those aeroplanes, and I knew that, you know, a Spitfire, for example, is a big tail dragger. So kind of the way into that is smaller tail draggers and then slightly bigger ones, and then you gradually sort of move up the ladder. Read a book called First Light by Jeffrey Wellen that a lot of people know.
Fantastic book.
In my opinion, probably the best book in the world on anything. And that's a blueprint for flying these aircraft. You know, he flew the Tiger Moth and then the Harvard and then the Spitfire. And I kind of read that and I thought, well, if it worked then, why wouldn't that work now? And it still does. That is still the training pipeline for these kind of airplanes. Mm-hmm. And so in 2012, I ended up leaving the Air Force and starting my CPL. I'd done the hour building stage, started the CPL. And then got a job with a little flying school down in Sussex in Shoreham, and they had Tiger Moths and Stomps and Cubs and that sort of thing. And then in 2016, I formed with a few other people the HAWKER Typhoon Preservation Group. So we're sort of a charity raising money to rebuild a Typhoon, and that, along with the other flying. And then I kept in touch with Cliff, and I got a display authorization with Cliff being my evaluator for that. He introduced me to a few people. The charity got me meeting a few people, and they sort of overlapped and crossed over, if you like, in about 2018. And I got asked by John Romain of the Aircraft Restoration Company if I would fly his Spitfire. And I said yes.
We'll bring that back on. So, so this is the Spitfire on the right-hand side, is it?
All of them are, yeah. Just different views. So yeah, on the right, that's it on the ground out in front of the hangar, bottom right. The next two to the left, so the one on its own in flight and the one off the wing in flight, that's actually a Mark 8, and that was my last flight of last year. So I was flying the two-seater, so effectively like the one on the bottom left. But in the back of the two-seater was the owner of that Mark 8, because he'd never seen it in flight from the air. So he's a pilot himself,
Mhm.
and he flies it himself, but he'd never seen it in flight, and he'd had a period away from flying, and so we organised that for him. The top left was a formation sortie last year. A couple of people that bought effectively a pair of Braymont watches, the Battle of Britain edition, and with that came a flight in one of these airplanes, and the guys both came down together. And the bottom left actually was one of my first passenger flights, not the first, but one of the first, early in the season of last year.
So as a passenger, do they sit in the front or the back? Because I came from my EFTS was on the Chipmunk, and the instructor was in the back and the pilot was in the front. But on Tiger Moth, it was the other way around, wasn't it?
Yeah. So if so with a Chipmunk, if you are learning to fly the aeroplane, you'll sit in the front.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the Spit here, so the pilot sits in the front and the passenger sits in the back. Yeah, you're quite right. Tiger Moth, when you're learning to fly, you actually sit in the back, you solo from the back. So yeah, there's a few things that you can't do from the other seat, like start the engine. That's quite important. So you sit in the front. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've had one Tiger Moth out of Cambridge. There's a yellow one that they used to fly out of Cambridge. I don't know whether they still do.
Yeah, Cambridge Flying Group. They're still going. They do.
Yeah.
They've got two or three Tigers. Nice little group. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just we'll have a quick break. We'll just say hello to Marcello, who is all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. So he joins us tonight, and I know I can see there are other people viewing. So don't be afraid to jump in, say hello to everybody, ask any questions, and join in. But there's some really interesting stuff going on there, and I mean, we could come back to First Light. It is an absolutely awesome book. It really sort of takes you. It's so descriptive and so immersive. I don't know whether you found that. I just couldn't put it down.
Yeah, I read it in about 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And so I always wanted to join the Air Force. My grandfather was an Air Force pilot during the war. I was always into aviation, but never kind of really knew how to do it. Just knew I sort of wanted to join the Air Force, but never really knew kind of how I would do that. And I actually got quite severely put off the idea by the Air Force themselves. When I was 15, I had a careers day at school. And I went up to this guy on the stand who was Air Force. I think he was a flight sergeant in something or other. And I walked up to him and I said, look, I want to join the Air Force. What do I need to do? And he looked me up and down. And to be fair, I was 6 foot plus at 15. And then I kind of stopped growing. But so I was a bit of a lanky bugger. And he honestly took one look up and down and he said, forget it, mate, you'll be too tall. Yeah. And, when you're that kind of age in life, you're quite impressionable, aren't you? And you take what you hear as gospel, especially when it came in my, sort of from the RAF. So I said, all right, I have to think of something else to do then. And it kind of threw me for years. And I was just kind of ambling around really through GCSEs, through A-levels, and just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then some friends from school and college had joined the Air Force, and I was talking to them. And they said, no, that's rubbish. There's people here that are 6'4", 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'6", even, flying some of the rotary stuff.
I had the same.
Yeah, get on with it. And did. But the story of First Light, my mum said she could tell I was down in the dumps. This was kind of college time with this whole Air Force thing. And we were going on a family holiday to Egypt for her birthday. I think it was 50th or 60th. It must have been 50th. And she just said, oh, you'll like this book, read it, and took it with us. And I wasn't really a big reader as a kid, and read this book, as I say, on this family holiday in about 3 days. And I just came downstairs and then sort of spoke to the friends and the sort of things all combined. And I said, right, that's it. I came down to dinner one night. I just said, right, that's it. I'm learning to fly. I'm joining the Air Force. Finished the book, put it down. Bosh, right, I'm joining the Air Force. Yeah. And that was that. And I just never even entertained an alternative path really.
Yeah, I was similar to that, and I was told, because I used to wear glasses, and I do now. I'm short-sighted slightly now, but I was long-sighted at the time, and I was told, no chance of being a pilot. You have to have 20/20 vision. And I went to work for an insurance company. I was so fed up one day. I walked into the careers office and said, "Look, do you need glasses to be a pilot? And do you have to have 20/20 vision?" I went, "No, fine. Come and fill this out." Filled the form out, and off I went, and that's history. But one of the things as a kid, I was absolutely I loved, and I had models of them as a kid. Airfix models was this little beastie.
I think it's a lot of people know of the Typhoon through that Airfix kit. Yeah. And I think the codes on the Airfix kit were HFL, and pretty much everyone knows it. And it's just like a imprinted memory for so many people.
Yeah, and it's a beast of an aircraft. And you've got into this preservation. I'm just going to switch my phone off. Somebody's pinging in saying, "Hello, Matt. Are you on the show?" So yeah, it's a beast of an airplane. And quick question here, Mark. I'm 6'3". So Mark's from Houston. We've got Kevin from Cambridge. We've just been talking about Cambridge. There's my flight in the Tiger Moth from Cambridge. And we've got.
I know Kevin. Hi, Kevin. How you doing? Yeah.
So I see, Kevin, you're in the cockpit there. What are you flying? This is my question. But anyway, back to the Typhoon. This was a real workhorse of World War II, like the Mosquito and the Tempest.
Yeah.
Sort of all singing, all dancing. And you got into this because you did a bit of research. Just talk us through that rather than me yak away.
Yeah. So when I left the Air Force and began instructing, I kind of always knew that my granddad was in the Air Force and had a loose idea of his sort of service history and what he did, but he died when I was really young. So I never got that chance to sort of, find everything out. And so when I left and I was in my first season instructing, I was doing some research into his flying history and discovered that he flew. We started off at the Hurricane in North Africa, got shot down, bailed out, broke his back because the parachute didn't open correctly. Got fixed up, came back to the UK, joined a Hurricane squadron again. Then they transitioned to the Spitfire, and then finally the Typhoon in early 1944. And he flew the Typhoon, and I found out various bits and bobs, and that he got shot down on the 21st of May 1944, just before D-Day. So 2 and a bit weeks before D-Day. Probably saved his life. He force landed in Holland, ended up getting captured day. Went to Stalag Luft 3, so Great Escape fame, but he turned up just as the Great Escapees really were all being rounded up.
Right.
And then he took part in the Forced March at the end of the war, and he left the Air Force Christmas Day or Christmas Eve 1945. But he flew this Typhoon, and I thought, the Typhoon, that's pretty interesting. There's none of those around, so did some more research, and there are none of them around, certainly none flying. And I ended up on this little forum somewhere. I never use forums, but this research took me to this post that had been made on this forum from a guy about a year previous to that, and it had effectively been ignored, that said he found or had parts from this particular Typhoon, which was the serial number of the aircraft my granddad was flying on the day he got shot down. And I couldn't really believe it. But so I registered for this forum, left a message, which was public, with my contact details, and said, look, if you still got these parts, that's my granddad. So I'd love to have a chat. And he ended up getting back to me. But someone else got back to me as well, was this private collector who was collecting a load of other Typhoon parts in the UK, and with a view to really just making a cockpit to take round shows in schools and educate kids and whatever. And he sort of said, did you hear back from this guy? And I said, no, not yet. But then I did hear back from this guy with his parts, and he said he'd actually just sold them all, but if he hadn't delivered them yet or posted them, and if I wanted them, he'd save a couple of small cockpit parts and send them to me, which he did. So I've got them. And then I got back in touch with this other fella in the UK who'd been collecting all these parts, and we had another conversation. I said, look, what are you really doing with all these bits of Typhoon that you've got? And he said, oh, well, I'd love to see it fly, but it would cost far too much money. I've kind of got everything I need, but it would cost far too much money. He had loads of drawings. He had an engine on the way, cockpit section. The rear fuselage is the main section. You can see it top right. It crashed in a field. Tail sections, all sorts of stuff, loads of stuff. And I said, right, well, what's stopping this from flying then? And he said, well, the money. I said, yeah, okay, how much? And he'd spoken to a few restoration workshops, and they said largely about 5 million quid. So I said to him, look, are you saying that if we could find 5 million quid, we can make this thing fly? And he said, yeah. And I said, fine, let's raise 5 million quid then. And that was kind of the start of what then became the HAWKER Typhoon Preservation Group. All the parts he had formed the project, and the charity sort of owns actively gifted them all to the charity to set it up. He's now left. Other people that I formed it with or that have come in the subsequent years have left, but other people have come along. But yeah, it's our sort of mission to raise now what's more like 6 or 7 million, because that 5 million was nearly 10 years ago we were talking about that.
Because of Brexit.
Cause Brexit, everything's caused Brexit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cause COVID, cause Ukraine, cause cost of living, cause Trump, cause the Chinese spy balloon, cause everything, But yeah, so that's our mission really. And the more research you do into it, the more you realize it's this completely unsung hero. 666 Typhoon pilots were killed flying it. Loads more were seriously injured, life-changing injuries. Loads more were shot down and captured. 3,317 were built. Not a single one survives in airworthy condition, but we've got Spitfires and Hurricanes coming out of our ears. Nothing wrong with that. They're a brilliant aeroplane, but there are other aircraft that also did a lot. And the Typhoon, some historians that have got, very good reputations have actually credited it with shortening the war.
Yeah. Because it was so versatile. It was a bit of a beast to handle, though. Reading some accounts, it was a bit of a beast to handle, I understand.
Yeah, it was obviously very powerful. It's a single engine aircraft with a massive great propeller, 14-foot 7-inch diameter propeller, I think, on a single engine aircraft. Now that is a lot of swing if you get a bit carried away with the throttle. Yeah. But once in flight, it was very, very stable, and the pilots really liked the aeroplane. It was a very, very stable gun platform, and later rocket and bomb platform as well, because that's what it ultimately ended up being employed as, the first ever really dedicated close air support aircraft. And it was close air support in the modern sense of the word, front line, and 100, 200 yards in front of that was the enemy positions, and they were being rocketed and bombed and strafed, within 100 or 200 yards of our own troops. They would mark the targets with smoke. They would have an embedded Air Force person with that frontline troops calling these guys in off what then became known as a cab rank. So they'd just be kind of circling overhead, and they'd go down sort of 2 at a time onto this target until it was neutralized, and then they move on to the next one, which is kind of exactly what we do today now. But that was the first time it was really done. But it was hugely dangerous. When you're flying low level, you've got the light flak, and calling it light flak is a bit not quite the right term.
It's not like throwing confetti at you, is it? It's
It's like you go outside in a rainstorm and try not to get wet. It's just this aircraft that we're rebuilding, it got delivered in January 45, got shot down in the first 4-month career, and in that time it got hit by flak 18 times. So if you consider that it probably took maybe 2 days each time to repair it, that's pretty much every mission it flew, it got hit by flak.
Yeah.
In terms of the days in 4 months, it's just crazy.
Yeah. Now I don't know the answer to the question, Mark, but we unfortunately, unlike the US, where they've got a desert full of vintage aircraft, I would have expected once they were after they finished their service, they would just end up as razor blades. But I don't know whether you've got any further intel on that.
Yeah, the answer is not just most Typhoons scrapped, but all Typhoons were systematically scrapped. The reason being, it was coming to the end of the war and it had served its purpose. They no longer needed this dedicated close air support aircraft. And the Tempest Mark V was effectively the Typhoon Mark II, but they just changed the name because the Typhoon had a few teething problems, and there was a few little confidence issues with it, but they were fixed. But effectively, you've got the Spitfire Mark I, Mark V, Mark IX. Once you've got the Mark IX, you're not going to keep all the Mark Is. You either upgrade them or get rid of them. And that's kind of what happened with the Typhoon. I think it was perhaps slight oversight that not a single one was kept, because that is what happened. And the only reason that the rear fuselage of this one survives is because it got sold for scrap at the end of the war and ended up in a museum where it was effectively forgotten about. And there's one in the RAF Museum in London, in Hendon in London. And the only reason that one survives is because it was loaned to the United States during the war for trials. It was actually crashed, not that badly, but it was pranged, dismantled, put in the corner of a hangar, and left there and forgotten about. And they thought it actually was a Hurricane. Someone from the RAF Museum went over in the 60s and was poking around and said, "Hey, that's a Typhoon. Can we have it back?" And they went, "No, it's a Hurricane." And he said, "Well, we'll give you a Hurricane if we can have that Typhoon." And they said, "Yeah, fine." So it was swapped for a Hurricane, and that's why the RF Museum now has the Typhoon, because otherwise there would not be a single one around.
Yeah, so there's just this one, but there is none flying. So this is Kevin's just said he's upgraded to silver membership. What's that? That is the membership of the Preservation Trust. Is that right?
He has indeed, and thank you very much, Kevin. So we established, when we first started the project in 2016, we had what we called the Supporters Club at the time, with an annual option or a lifetime option. Annual was 25 quid, lifetime was 10 times that. One-off payment, slightly bigger contribution, but sort of upfront, it's a big kind of leap of faith. We've developed that now. Those two tiers still exist. They're called bronze and silver, which Kevin has signed up to. And then above that, there's gold, platinum, and diamond. It really just depends on a person's wallet. You get various benefits that obviously increase with the amount contributed. But all of those supported tiers are effectively a donation towards the cause, to try and get this thing back in the air. And it's kind of, that phrase, ask not what your country can do for you, but you can do for your country. It's kind of, how much can you afford to contribute? And that's a really great, the more the better, because the more money that's raised, the sooner she'll be in the air. It's realistically 4 to 5 years if the money can flow, and it's obviously a lot of money to get this thing in the air, in the region of, it's going to be probably either side of £6 million, which is a huge amount.
It would be fantastic to see that happen. Now, I've created you a QR code. This is just a link to the website. It's not you scan this QR code and we'll empty your bank account.
It should be. It should have been that. That would have been a great idea.
Yeah. It's a QR code that just takes you to the website of the Hawker Typhoon Preservation Group. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes. But this photograph, is this an actual photograph of your grandfather in there?
Bottom left, yeah. So standing middle row, far right, that's my granddad. Sat on or stood in front of a Typhoon. He flew with 184 Squadron. And something I found out when I then became a flying instructor at Goodwood, I carried on my research into him. So I began flying instruction at Shoreham and then moved to Goodwood a couple of seasons later. And I found out that his last flight actually ended up being from Goodwood. So the squadron were based there at that time. And on the 21st of May, that date, his last flight in a Typhoon, in fact, his last flight ever, was from Goodwood.
Oh, crikey.
So, which was quite a sort of spooky feeling, when you're actually standing on the same piece of ground. And the aim one day, if all the stars align, this aircraft will fly. I've no doubt that it will fly anyway, but if everything comes together that we get it flying, I want to incorporate, and so do the rest of the team, all these parts from my grandfather's aircraft in the aircraft that we're rebuilding. They're non-structural, cockpit parts, like a cockpit light fitting, a section of the throttle quadrant, and a fuse box, which has still actually got 2 glass fuses that are intact, still inside it from the forced landing. But I want to incorporate those into the rebuild, and then fly the aircraft from Goodwood on the 21st of May. And if I get the right experience and I'm deemed suitably qualified to do it, then I'll be at the controls as well, which is a kind of quite a unique story, really. Grandson flies his grandfather, bits of his grandfather's aeroplane from the same place on the same date. There's even a chance it could be painted up as his codes, for that trip or for a season or for. So closing of the circle type thing.
I feel there's a book coming on.
Well, you never know. Could be.
So here's some bits. So you've got the fuselage, the main fuselage piece there. You've got so this is it in action. I don't know how long ago these were taken, but perhaps you could just talk us through these.
Yeah. So top left, if you like, is the fuselage. So the rear fuselage was complete. It was damaged, but it was complete from RB396. And effectively every single piece has to be taken to bits, assessed, treated / refurbished if it can be, and then put back together again. So you kind of break all the bits apart, get them all ready to go. You can see the kind of, it's basically frames and stringers and skin is the main structure. It's monocoque structure that then is very strong. You can see the green frames in that top left picture. So those are all almost all original, and they've been treated and or mended. Some of them you can see little panels that have been sort of put over a damaged section to repair them effectively. The stringers, again, almost all have been reused, and what they've done, very clever, the guys, Airframe Assemblies, they've effectively cut the stringer, swap the ends around, re-splice them together with a new bit in the middle if it needed a new bit in the middle, to basically make them airworthy again. So it would have been considerably cheaper and considerably quicker to just break it to bits, make a pattern out of each part, and then make new parts and bung them all back together. But we want, and we're very keen on the sort of historical authenticity of the rebuild, because you want to have the actual aircraft flying again, not something that just looks like it. So some people might call it a replica. But of the fuselage, 80% of it is original material, which is a huge amount.
That is pretty epic, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and then
carry on.
Well, I was going to say that central picture of the fuselage is kind of it, pretty much all put back together, just being held in place with those pins. And that's about the stage it got to at the back end of 2021. And then with everything that was kicking off in the Ukraine, our sort of regular income just really started to dry up. So we had to pause it. But it's basically in that stage, but in pieces at the moment, and ready to be put back together and put back together properly, if you like, permanently. And that's about 50,000 that's going to cost to finish that section. Right. But when it gets finished, it'll be the first section of an airworthy HAWKER Typhoon to have been built since the war, which is quite significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were gifted an engine.
So bottom right there, that is not just any engine, that is our Napier Sabre. And it was gifted to us in the really early days of the project, actually, by Cranfield University, who, funny story-ish, they've actually forgot that they owned it. Because they'd had it on long-term loan to the Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust. So Cranfield had effectively had it pretty much since the war. It was factory inhibited, supposed to be used as a teaching aid, and basically never was. And so they put it out on long-term loan. And we naturally needed an engine for the project. So people on the team were doing loads of research and came across this engine and started speaking to Rolls-Royce, and it was all sort of good to go. And then they sort of said, well, actually, we don't have the authority to give this to you because it's not really ours. So we did some more research and said, well, it seems to belong to Cranfield. And they said, yeah, it does. So we got in touch with and I mean, longer than I'm going to say now, but effectively said to them, look, this engine is actually yours. And they sort of said, is it? I said, yeah. And they said, oh, right, that's great. Well, thanks very much. And we said, well, can we have it? Yeah. And obviously explained the project and what we're doing and you know what. And they sort of said, well, seeing as we didn't even know we had it, yeah, sure, you can have it. And it was gifted to us. You know, it's a bit more formal than that, but it was gifted to us officially to the project to ultimately power this aeroplane back to flight, because there are hardly any of these in the world. It's like a handful, 5 or 6 maybe. I don't know an exact number. No one does really.
That's almost priceless.
Struggle to find another one. There's 1 or 2 others out there that could be obtained possibly, but we've also been trying to do that for nearly 10 years and haven't got anywhere yet. Yeah. So yeah, it's priceless.
Interesting question from Mark. How does the power of the Typhoon compare to a Spitfire?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realise that the Typhoon first flew in February 1940. 24th of February 1940, so long before the Battle of Britain, long before, in fact, even the Battle of France, really. And at that time, the Merlins, typically a Merlin 3, something like that, in the Spitfire and the Hurricane on the front line was doing about 1,000 horsepower, give or take, depending on your altitude and whatever, but 1,000 horsepower. This engine came along, 24-cylinder sleeve valve H-block, in 1940, doing 2,200. Similar displacement to the Rolls-Royce Griffin that was developed from the Merlin, 37 litres ish. I think the Griffin is. I think it's about 35. But yeah, in 1940, over 1,200 horsepower more. So in terms of power, a huge amount more. At the time, the Typhoon was about 100 miles an hour faster than frontline Spitfire and Hurricane. Certainly than Hurricane, maybe 70 or 80 miles an hour faster than the Spitfire. Once it entered service in kind of 1942, late 1941, 1942 really, it was the only aircraft in the RAF's inventory that could catch the Germans' new Focke-Wulf 190. And it actually, not only would it catch them, it could overtake them if they had a head start. So it was kind of pressed into service because it was the only aircraft that had the performance to match this 190, in fact, better it.
So almost an interceptor.
And it was, and that's what it was designed as. It was designed as a replacement to the Spitfire and the Hurricane, as an interceptor fighter, air superiority fighter, high level, and it just didn't perform very well at high altitude. But in pushing it into service, quite often what was low level with what were called tip and run raids. So the Germans would fly over the channel at 0 feet, pop up in a 109 or a 190, drop a bomb on a seaside town and scoot back home over the channel. The Typhoons were based all along the south coast, some even like right on the top of Beachy Head, just there to respawn, that sort of thing. They would scramble, chase these guys down, catch them, and nearly always dispatch them. So these guys that were doing these sorties realized that at low level, this was a phenomenal aeroplane. And then the squadron commanders at the time, sort of quite, ingenious, and they're thinking outside the box a lot, possibly more so than nowadays, because they were allowed to back then, they're not allowed to now. They sort of started saying, look, this is so good at low level. Let's just go across the channel and see what we can find. Let's go and shoot up some trains. Let's go and shoot up some flat guns, some barges, some this, some that, some airfields. Let's go and drop a few bombs on a few airfields. And they started pioneering this low-level ground attack, and it was just savagely effective. And it ended up having 8 rockets or 2 1,000-pound bombs. And to put that bomb load in perspective, if a B-17 bomber was fueled up for a Berlin raid, so fairly long range, but fueled up for a Berlin range, the Typhoon could carry over half of that bomb load as a B-17 fueled for Berlin. But it flew at 500 miles an hour. Yeah. So, it's just a phenomenal aircraft. And 8 60-pound rockets. It was said to have the equivalent firepower of a Royal Navy cruiser broadside of the day, and it's flying at 500 miles an hour. It's just a phenomenal weapon. So in terms of performance, that's a very long way of saying it kind of put the others to shame. It's a bit heavier than a Spitfire, but it's got, think Griffin engine Spitfire and then a little bit more, and that's the sort of performance it had, but in 1940.
Absolutely outstanding. I've just got to have a word with Dan. What you doing turning up at this time? We've nearly finished, and you missed all the fun. So you're going to have to go and rewind and look at all this, Dan. Dan is a previous Veterans Voice chap, ex-RAF as well.
Fantastic evening.
And then we've got Kevin, who has. Who would really like, I mean, he's upgraded to silver. He'll probably upgrade to gold now he's seen this. He hopes you're going to fly it with it in your grandfather's memory, which would be outstanding. Now, we have gone over, which I'm usually pretty good at nipping this in the bud on the half hour. However, this has been pretty fascinating so far. So we're going to have to draw it to a close because you've got a 4 a.m. start.
Wow. I'm in no rush. I've got another 20 minutes if you want. It depends if people are falling asleep in the back road.
But tell me about this.
Oh, God. Oh, yeah, well, personal choice, isn't it? Like, I don't particularly like Crocs, so I wouldn't eat McDonald's. But if anyone does or is connected or has the misfortune of being connected with me on LinkedIn, I do like to have a little fun rant every now and again. And I have concerns over some of the direction that the aviation industry is going. And this T-shirt was a joke, even though actually I have sold some, which it did surprise me. But it was just a joke, and it was in response to a post that I saw a couple of weeks ago. So if you get a job with Ryanair, and there's not really anything against people that do get jobs with Ryanair, crack on. But if you get a job with Ryanair, you have to pay for your type rating, and you pay up front. And not only that, but you pay to be selected to see if you can join the company. That's like me having to pay 10 quid every time I go to Tesco to be selected to see if I'm able to do my weekly shop. It's just a joke.
Paying for an interview, basically.
Yeah, you pay. Yeah, you pay to attend the selection day, and it's not a few quid either. It's 400 and something euros, and there's a pre-selection selection which is charged as well. That's about 60 euros. It's just a money-making racket, if you ask me. Yeah. And anyway, somebody had got a job with Ryanair. Fair play to him, brilliant, whatever. But he'd posted on social media. Great, fine, happy with that. But sponsored that post, which means he paid to promote his own post, telling people how he'd paid to get a job after having paid for selection. But he kind of left out those really important little elements. And I don't do naming and shaming and all that sort of stuff. But I just said, look, guys, if you're going to pay for a job, don't then pay to blast about how good you are without telling people that you've actually paid for it. It's just not on, and you are kind of queue jumping a little bit. There are other people that say that you're not. I kind of think that it is a little bit. It's ultimately Ryanair. Anyway, but be honest at the same time, because there's a lot of people out there that are already in enough debt through having afforded the flying training, and they've scrimped and saved every penny to get their license. They haven't got another 30 grand to go and throw at Ryanair. And if you're in that position, great, lucky you. But just be aware that you're kind of rubbing other people's noses in it a little bit. But anyway, loads of people kicked off. The opinion police came out and they said, oh, there's nothing wrong with Ryanair. And I said, no, there isn't. And that's not my point. My point was paying this sort of to tell everyone how great you are. And so I just did a follow-up the next day, and I said, look, a few people got the wrong end of the stick. This is my opinion on Ryanair, purely as a joke. I've never said they're unsafe. They're not unsafe. They're one of the safest airlines in the world. Absolutely don't disagree with that. Their training is very, very thorough, so it should be. You've got to pay 30 grand for it. I just disagree with the way they operate in this, charging people for a type rating. And their own director of flight operations actually said that the reason Ryanair's tickets are so cheap is because the pilots are paying for their own type ratings, and it's part subsidizing the ticket prices. I just think that's wrong. If you ask me, that is my opinion. Like I said, the guys are very safe. They're very competent. I just disagree with Ryanair charging everyone for everything. And anyway, so that's the basis of that T-shirt. And I sold one. So, hey, and all the money, you know, and I made a cup, and then we had someone else being grumpy, someone from British Airways. What was his name?
You got a troll there. You got the world's favourite troll.
Yeah, and he said, "Oh, it must be nice to be such an entitled snob." And you know what? I just took a screen grab of that and put that on a mug, and you know, lol. Basically, it's just a bit of fun. And I think if you're in aviation, you've got to have a bit of a sense of humour. And if you can't take it, just scroll past. This life would be very boring if we didn't take the mick out of each other. And I think it keeps us on our toes, you know. And there's no sort of, you know, I'm not bit racist, misogynistic, all that. It's not that. It's a bit of harsh banter. Harsh, yeah, fair, also fair. So, you know, you've just, you know, coming from a slight military background, not so much as other people, but some of that banter, my goodness, you just some people that accuse you of overstepping the line in Sibley Street, perhaps they want to see a day of banter in the military. It can be pretty brutal, but it's I think it's good for you. It's character building.
Oh yeah, a bit of black humor doesn't do anybody any harm. So Kevin's going to give his mates a bit of stick.
Kev, which you should buy a T-shirt. You should buy them a T-shirt.
Absolutely,
Kev,
buy a T-shirt, buy a mug, and also find out whether they know the difference between a hanger and a hanger, because that's one of your other mugs, isn't it? I didn't put that one up. So Dan, apology accepted, Dan. As long as you watch it back and stick some comments on it, so that's fine. We're just going to draw it to a close in a second, just by adding my absolute favourite photograph of your that's been on your post, and that one's stunning. So everybody's turning their monitors upside down now, but that's a stunning photo. But what we've done today is something a little bit different on Veterans Voice, in that, and we're going to be taking it that way forwards now, is looking at some good causes that veterans are promoting, and promoting different aspects of what veterans are doing. And this one, in my mind, is an absolute brilliant one. And for one, I would absolutely love to go. Love to see that flying, and I'll come and wave the table tennis bats down at Goodwood if you taxi out by all means. But thank you very much, and we'll put you back on there. Where we go. If you scan the barcode there, that will just take you to the Preservation Group website, so you can have a look at all the good stuff they're doing and see some of the fantastic photographs. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Sam, for joining me, and have a safe trip tomorrow. And thank you everybody for joining us. So we had the UK and we had the US on today, Atlanta, Georgia, and Houston, Texas. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.